We'll begin in Ukraine, where President Volodymyr Zelenskyy praised his country's military for reportedly shooting down 6 Russian Kinzhal hypersonic missiles in a single night. Russia's Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu, on the other hand, dismissed Ukraine's claim, saying Moscow had not launched that many. This comes as the last ship under the current Black Sea grain deal left Ukraine today, with African leaders planning a peace mission to Russia and Ukraine. We bring you some key events of the war, which enters its 448th day.
At least one person has died and several were injured in the latest Russian shelling to hit frontline regions in eastern and southern Ukraine. A missile strike on the southern Ukrainian city of Mykolaiv late on Tuesday injured one person and damaged a shopping mall and other buildings. That's according to the regional governor, Vitaly Kim. Also on Tuesday, Russia fired more than 400 shells at the southern Kherson region, injuring 7 people, including 3 children. Russia shelled 16 towns and villages close to the southern front line in Zaporizhia region. 3 people, including a 34-year-old tractor driver and 61-year-old agronomist, were wounded in a field, and another 48-year-old was injured in Huliapol. Now, Ukraine's First Lady, Olena Zelenskya, has asked South Korea to provide air defense systems as well as non-lethal military hardware when she met with President Yoon Suk-yeol in Seoul on Tuesday, both countries have reported. Mrs. Zelenskyy, who is visiting the South Korean capital as a Ukrainian presidential envoy, requested a raft of items, including mine detectors, the mining equipment, and first aid vehicles. According to Ukraine's presidential office, she told Mr. Yoon that the country needed help with technologies South Korea is famous for. Since the war broke out in Ukraine, South Korea has maintained its stance of not providing lethal weapons to a warring country, although Mr. Yoon has hinted at a possible major policy shift. In the meantime, Ukrainian forces say they have liberated part of embattled eastern city of Bakhmut. Ukrainian forces have liberated substantial areas to the north and south of the embattled eastern city. According to a Ukrainian general staff, Russia's attempted offensive actions around the city has been unsuccessful, though he acknowledged that Russia is also making advances in Bakhmut, bringing in paratroopers and destroying the city with artillery. Ukrainian forces have also begun using long-range Storm Shadow missiles provided by Britain to strike Russian targets, 2 U.S. officials and a Western official has said. The Storm Shadow is a long-range cruise missile with stealth capabilities, jointly developed by the UK and France, which is typically launched from the air. The Council of Europe, the main body governing human rights on the continent, met at its 4th summit in almost 75 years on Tuesday, with the top priority of supporting Ukraine against Russia's war. In the meantime, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the State Department would not rule out designating Russia a state sponsor of terrorism for its accused atrocities in Ukraine. The UK and the Netherlands also say they are working to build an international coalition to help Ukraine procure F-16 fighter jets. Efforts are also ongoing to extend the deal to allow the safe export of grain from Ukraine's Black Sea port. It is set to expire on Thursday, if not renewed.
Now, for more on the war, an African Leaders Peace Mission, international and constitutional law expert Livingstone Waitri joins me on the ward now. Good to have you join us.
Thank you, and good thanks for having me.
So African countries have pretty much tried to stay out of this war. They have been neutral. When you look at the different voting that was put on the floor of the United Nations, they have tried to abstain. But now they are trying to mediate. Do they have a better chance at mediating this war? And what leverage do they have?
Well, first of all, I think it's good to know that both leaders, Zelensky and Putin, subscribing to alternative resolutions in this particular war, as it is called, because it's no longer just a military operation. This is a full-blown war that has taken many lives. Surprisingly, that olive branch is coming from African countries. And one of the questions to ask is if Africa has the capacity, the level of sophistication that is needed, and what are we bringing to the table? The compelling reasons why Russia and Ukraine would want to heed the call of Africa to cease fire in such a war that has rattled both nations, particularly Ukraine, with the interest of the US and NATO at stake. But don't rule out the fact that Russia has enjoyed a long-standing relationship with many African countries, particularly in view of the mutual mistrust between Russia and certain African countries against the West, because most of them have been victims of Western manipulation. As such, America has also accused countries such as South Africa of supplying arms to Moscow against Ukraine, which has again brought to question the neutrality that South Africa has enjoyed during this period. But again, it's an interesting development. We hope that African leaders are able to engage a man like Putin with all of his ideologies, because one of the things to consider is, what is Africa bringing to the table? Is Africa able or has the capacity to compel a country like Russia to cease fire and begin to listen to contrary opinions that may question his wider interest in this war? I think one of the factors that has also compelled and put Africa in this shoe is the fact that Africa is hard hit by the scarcity of grains, because a very large quantity of grains consumed in Africa comes from that region, I think largely from Ukraine. And so Africa is beginning to suffer serious food crisis, that its steps towards pushing for an amicable resolution of this conflict may not be seen as a busybody approach. It's a step of an interested party. But what capacity do we have?
Exactly, but let's talk about, sorry to jump in, because you mentioned South Africa, and I really want to stay there for a while. Let's talk about how much South Africa seems to be in some sort of a quagmire and dilemma. If you look at it that way, first of all, it has to try and maintain neutrality and maintain relations with the West. Bilateral relations, because of what it also stands to benefit. But it is also a member of BRICS, the bloc that has both China and Russia. Could this effort really help South Africa rehabilitate its image as a neutral player and mediator, following accusations that it has drifted towards Russia?
Yes, there are very interesting diplomatic implications with consular benefits, as it were, from this particular engagement. South Africa is now playing the big brother role that Nigeria ordinarily should play, because among the 6 countries listed, Nigeria is not even there. So South Africa is taking a step that will boost its stake, and also rebuild its image under attack, because America has already accused South Africa of supplying weapons to Moscow, seeking to maybe bring to question its acclaimed neutrality in this war. So this step indeed is going to pay off for Russia for good. Pay off for South Africa for good, because South Africa, as it were, has a lot of diplomatic advantages, particularly with respect to the reach of its leadership. The Nelson Mandela era put South Africa on a prominent global map. And I think they are trying to leverage on that to have the West see that it means well and not necessarily biased or taking sides with Russia, because South Africa has been under serious pressure to openly show its support for Russia. It may not be out of place to say that South Africa largely has more interest and sympathy for Russia than Ukraine because of their age-long ties. It may not be out of place to say so, but South Africa also is taking steps to prove to the world that not minding the fact that we have this type of relationship with Russia, but we also mean well for
and I think,
both
like
nations,
you said,
Ukraine.
I think, like you said,
Yes.
you know, it's like you mentioned, South Africa has been playing the big brother when it comes to foreign policy in Africa, and it seems to be ahead of Nigeria.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your thought on this. We will see how the West reacts to all of this. Livingstone Weche, good to have you talk to us.